Good morning. It's March 15th, 2022, and welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. I know you can't quite tell looking right now, but we've actually moved into our new studio. The Western Standard has moved into much larger new offices. It's been quite a scramble. Some people were here late last night getting everything set up, but we've got it together to hold a show today, and things are moving onward and upward. Nico now can reside a good distance from me. You know, there's always hazards after Taco Tuesday and things like that, and he'll be much safer and better for it. So this is the Western Standard's live show. We come every day, Monday to Friday at 11:30 Mountain Standard Time. Run usually till about 1 o'clock, unless, news is going crazy, as it often does. And basically, the show will go as long as it has to. And it's good to see some of you folks coming in, Ashley and Pamela and Beaver House, whoever that might be. That's that reminder. This is live and it's interactive. And that's one of the great things with it. Bring those comments in, talk about the guests, talk about the news issues amongst each other, sending stuff our way, whatever way it goes. Just try to keep things civil, of course, though. Let's be somewhat polite to each other. As you know, I rant, I rave, I go on, but I can still differ with people without getting too far over the edge. Let's see. Somebody Canuckians say don't advertise charade today. Hey, we get different columnists who say a lot of different things with different points of view, and that's part of the fun. I don't certainly agree with everything every columnist puts up, but the more voices we got, the better. And I've got some really great guests on today, and part of that'll cover a little bit of it. Rachel Emmanuel is going to be my second guest. She's joined the Western Standard team as an Ottawa reporter. She was with the mainstream media and basically had to leave it. She'd had enough, and she's going to explain why. Part of that's that lack of diverse opinions, that editorial coming down on top of others and saying this is the way it's got to go, and it's just not for any principled journalists a world to live in. I'm also going to talk to independent MLA Drew Barnes, Medicine Hat, Cypress Hills, and he wrote a column with us on Paul Hinman's gamble in running in the Fort McMurray by-election. Drew has some strong views on whether that's a good idea or not, and we're going to talk about that for a little bit today. So that should be quite interesting. Now, for myself, what I'm going to get a ranting and raving on is the fools with the Defund the Police gang. I mean, the Defund the Police gang really needs to pick a lane. I mean, they're pretty much critical of every police action. They're also the first in line to demand that the police start cracking heads when a conservative group decides to protest. Canadian progressives were outright gleeful as police moved against the Truckers for Freedom convoy protests in Ottawa. Their only complaint was that the police didn't act swiftly or violently enough against the Bouncy Castle rebellion. Freedom protests have been happening every Saturday in Calgary, in the Beltline area, which is just south of downtown, for months now. In recent weeks, these protests have actually been drawing thousands of people, particularly while the Ottawa Truckers convoy protests were being held. The protest begins in a park where a few speeches are usually held, and then people do a march throughout the area that takes about an hour. We actually live streamed one of them if you look in our history of videos there. The larger ones take perhaps 20 minutes for everybody to walk by, and they do stop traffic and have been causing annoyances to businesses and residents in the area. It is a fleeting moment, though. Now, in the last 2 weeks, counter-protests have been organized by the usual suspects, and they've been trying to incite conflict with the Freedom Marchers. If one attends the protests, anywhere in their area, they know what I mean when I'm saying usual suspects. I mean, whether it's the right or the left, every city has a group of people who attend every protest, and they're always intent upon starting trouble. They usually don't even really care about any cause. They just want to spawn disorder for the sake of taking part in a personal adventure. Well, there's surely some genuine citizens among the counter-protests in Calgary last weekend. The organizers and people who came in front of the 90 people who came out, I should say. So there's about 90 people came out counter-protesting. And the ones in the front of that line were chronic protesters who simply want to raise hell. Calgary's police chief, Neufeld, said that the other day in a conference, which of course stirred them all up again. He called them professional protesters, but that's what they are. And this small group blocked the Freedom March last Saturday and wouldn't move aside. Pressure was building as thousands of peaceful protesters were stalled while these counter-protesters screamed at them, calling them fascists and racists, among other things. Police are trained in trying to quell conflict, and that's what they did that day. They asked the counter-protesters repeatedly to move aside and let the march pass peacefully. The counter-protesters responded by getting even more belligerent. Police finally found themselves forced to push back the small group of protesters before things got out of control. They used their bikes and shoved them back. It's a police technique. We saw that in Ottawa too, and nobody was hurt. But still, a short video clip of an officer pushing back counter-protesters was released, and the Defund the Police cult went predictably wild. How dare these police intervene rather than let a potential riot begin? Oh, but it didn't stop there. Some idiot noticed a pin worn by police officers and posted it on Twitter. They declared that the pin indicated support for militias and perhaps white supremacism. I mean, Calgary's left-wing Twitterati went ballistic. They were outraged. They'd found proof positive of an institutionalized white supremacist conspiracy in Calgary. The conspiracy ran so deep that even non-white officers were wearing this odious symbol. They howled. They demanded these police officers be fired. They screamed at their Defund the Police ally, Mayor Jody Gondek, to get active and disband the entire force. How could such a force allow officers to wear such a symbol? The righteous ire of the mob was almost palpable. Now let's have a look at what that pin was. Here's a close-up picture of what it really is. If you have a look, it says it's the public safety unit. You can't quite see it under the text there on the police officer, but it's worn on his left breast there, and all of the officers taking part wore those. The reason they wore it is because those are officers who've taken special training to manage crowd situations. Situations just like this. Even paramedics who have taken that training wear the same pin. That's all it is. It's an identifier that they've had 80 hours of training for this particular use, and they wear that. It's like a badge. That's it. No scandal, no conspiracy, no racism, guys. Even when the Twitter mob was shown the pin, they were frothing too hard to care. Even if it was an officially released pin to the police and paramedics, it looked icky to them, and it must represent a subculture of racism. The Defund the Police mob is really nuttier than squirrel poop. I wish we could ignore them, but a number of city councillors and Calgary's mayor actually indulge these guys. Here's the same symbol in another context. Let's have a look at it. It's from the Las Vegas Golden Knights. Is that NHL team a secret white supremacist group? If you listen to these kooks with the Defund the Police movement, they would think so. Calgary, and there's a few, I think, football teams and high school teams that use that symbol. It's an old 1,000-year-old symbol of I think it's Greek or Roman or something. It doesn't really matter. They're reading everything into it. Now, Calgary and many other urban centers are in the midst of social disorder outbreaks. Social disorder is the polite way to say crime waves. The roots of these crime waves run deep. Tough economic times and an opioid addiction epidemic are contributors. We need better addiction treatment. We need government policies to get better in general, and we need mental health supports. In the meantime, though, we still need police. Who the hell will you call when somebody's breaking into your home in the night? Guidance counselors? They're of little use. Who's going to deal with a potential riot if thousands of peaceful protesters are accosted by 100 extremists bent on causing issues? I mean, really, if the police had stepped aside, what would have happened last weekend? We don't know. These were peaceful protesters, but as I said the other day, bees are completely peaceful too until you go shake up the hive, and then you'll get stung. Now, whose fault is it if you get stung? So what the police did was get between the idiot about to shake the hive and the hive. That's what they did, and they had to push, and they saved them from themselves. Police forces and police cultures have plenty of room for improvement. Hey, I'm not saying they're perfect, but this call to defund them is nothing less than sheer idiocy. Would we improve healthcare by cutting funding, education, infrastructure? I mean, let's get real. The Defund the Police movement is hypocritical, extreme, and delusional. We need to stop listening to them and stop even considering cutting funds to our forces. The police forces may be imperfect, but they do keep us safe for the most part, and they have a tough, thankless job. Showing some respect for them would go a long way towards reducing adverse police events. How dejecting it must be to be constantly labeled a racist and a thug by people with the tacit support of many members within City Hall. If we want to work towards a world where we defund police, allow citizens then to defend their own person and property fully, even with firearms if needed, and to be able to contract private police services in their neighborhood with tax savings. Hey, I'm all ears if we really want to go down that road. But I don't think that's where the defund police people want to go. Until then, we need police forces, and we need the ones we have now. We need to support them, stop crapping on them, and ignore the nuts calling to defund them. That's what's got me triggered today. Now, let's check in with Melanie Risden from her fancy new desk in the new offices over there.
Hello.
Hey, Mel, how's it going over there?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Settling in so far?
Oh, yes.
Nothing more hectic than a move.
No kidding, right?
So, what do we got top in the news today?
Well, speaking of what you were just ranting about, City Council will be discussing those protests, the protests and the anti-protests, and what they're planning to do about it moving forward. So our reporter Eva will be looking into that and covering that a little bit later today. We've got Vancouver Police, who won back some funding after $5.7 million was cut from their budget. So obviously they're quite happy about that right now. That's on the website. Parliament has opened an unprecedented inquiry into the Liberal actions against the Freedom Convoy on February 14th when they invoked the Emergencies Act. So that 11-member panel will have approximately a year to sort of sort through the reasoning behind that and come up with a ruling as to whether it was justifiable. Apparently, there was 197 protesters arrested and approximately 257 individual bank accounts were frozen, with a total of $7.8 million frozen because of some of the actions taken with the invoking of that Emergencies Act. So a large investigation is set to happen into that. Founding president of Canada's largest union, Unifor, is now under investigation. Jerry Diaz recently quit citing some health concerns, and then he abruptly resigned from the union. So that is being investigated, and they don't plan to put any other statements out until later in March, until they get a report back on that. We've got a column from our columnist Karen Selleck on Ontario's Bill 67. She's saying that must be opposed. It is a private member bill that would amend the Education Act, inserting provisions on racial equity in the education system. So you can read up on that. Another story on another bill on the website, this one involving the Protection of Freedom of Conscience Act in Saskatchewan. Now this one forbids intimidation or coercion against healthcare workers to directly or indirectly influence or provide for doctors who will directly or indirectly provide assistance in dying. So we've got a story on that. Home sales are up across the country, and the average home price is incredibly high. It's up 20% from the same month last year, sitting at the average national price for a home, $816,000. So Cory, hopefully you don't need to relocate anytime soon. We've got an Angus Reid poll up that shows Canadians are split on the removal of mandates. It does vary sort of from province to province, and that poll is broken down on the story. We've got another opinion column from John Carpe. He's a lawyer and the president of Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. He says the outrageous bail conditions for Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Leach makes her basically a political prisoner. So he explains that in his column. And Cory, if you are looking for a vacation home, I've got the perfect one for you. It's down in Palm Beach, the second floor of the Tiffany building. And it's been turned into 13,000 square feet of residence, listed for just under $20 million.
I'll lobby for that raise from Derek, but I'm a little bit shy of that so far, but I certainly got something to strive towards now.
That's right. We also have a story coming out right away here. 72% of Americans support moving forward with the Keystone XL pipeline. So yeah, well, we're working on all of that, plus much more coming this afternoon.
Well, it's quite a bunch. You know, that's the thing we've watched as this show's evolved and these news check-ins. I just think it's noteworthy. There's so many stories. That's just today, you know, that are building up. It's going to be a whole segment on its own pretty soon with everybody as we get reporters across the country and all these stories. So
yeah, we do. And we've got lots of new ones as well coming on board. So it's going to be exciting. We're going to have very robust coverage coming from all across Canada.
We certainly will. Well, thanks for those updates, Mel. I'll let you get back on getting those stories together. We'll see you after the show.
Sounds good. Thanks, Cory.
Great, thanks. So yeah, as we were saying, it is getting busy. The reporter I'll be talking to a little later with Rachel Emmanuel. She started with us in Ottawa. There's a couple there. And just that reminder, get on there, take out a subscription, westernstandardonline.com. That's how we can do this. That's how we're independent media. That's how the government doesn't tell us what we can or can't say. One of the things that Rachel's going to talk about, part of why she left the mainstream, was that their media outlet got pressure from the Deputy Prime Minister's office. They were actually pressuring the office and the media bent a little. Like, what the heck? We're not there to answer to the government or people in power or pressure. They can get upset with us. They can question articles, but we don't bend when they tell us what to do. A lot of mainstream outlets do, though. And that's what happens when you get outlets that are dependent on government funding to operate. Government funding. Boy, that's a mouthful, isn't it? To operate. We don't. We rely on subscribers, and the subscribers have been fantastic. That's why we've been expanding like this. People are sick of the legacy media. And if you haven't subscribed already, geez, what are you waiting for? Get on there. It's $10 a month. If you use the coupon code TRIGGERED and you take out an annual one, you'll save another $10. It's $99 a year. I'm guessing now, my math could be off, but it should be then $89 for a year of subscription. If you use that coupon code TRIGGERED, for that price, less than $10 a month, you'll get all of this beyond the paywall. Unique content. We get reporters on the ground. We go out there across the country, plus columnists and all sorts of content from all over the place. So, hey, take out that subscription. And if you've already got one, you can buy one for someone else. And there's corporate subscriptions as well. We have a number of clients that way. They've bought bulk subscriptions, and that way all of their employees can read the Western Standard unfettered. I imagine they don't want them doing it while they're on the job, but they like knowing that their employees are kept up to date on news. I'll hit on a sponsor really quickly since I've got your ear on that before I start talking about more of those news items too, and that's Bitcoin Well. These guys have been sponsoring us for quite some time. They're a fantastic one. And if we're in this world now where the banks will seize your money, they'll come in and take it. I know that the government and banks and others are talking about how to get into your digital currency, but the thing to remember, the stuff on Bitcoin Well, if you have it in your cold wallet, which means it's kind of a separate physical thing, the banks can't get it. They can't take it. You can get your money away from the government. That's a way to do it. And it's complicated, not that complicated once they explain it. And that's part of it. It sounds nebulous. It sounds odd. How do I do this? A digital currency? I keep it in this cold wallet. I don't get it. What's a hot wallet? Well, these guys are there to facilitate it. And it's safe. They're a Western Canadian company. They're publicly traded. And they will walk you through it to find out if Bitcoin and digital currencies are for you or not. And they never hang on to your money. Like I said, you always have control of it. It's a safe way to examine it. Maybe it's not even for you, but this is the way you can find out for sure. And they'll let you know. BitcoinWell.com. Check those guys out. It's well worth it. And as I said, they've been a good sponsor. Home sales in BC have gone up in BC over $100,000. Yeah, the inflation, that's people don't want to talk about inflation a lot, but it is huge. It's big. It's impacting all of us. And we knew it was coming. How many times have I brought the Taxpayers Federation on and their new debt clock? They're doing a big new tour. I'm going to talk to Franco and Chris both about that because they're touring across the country with that. They actually had to get a new debt clock because it passed $1 trillion. They didn't have enough zeros on the old debt clock that Derek, I believe, was traveling around the country with at one time when he was at the Taxpayers Federation. It ran out of zeros. And you see, with that much borrowing, it puts pressure on your currencies. The bank issues bonds. This leads to inflation. It's not just, people are trying to blame it all on the Ukraine-Russia war. No, that's a contributor without doubt. And the energy costs going up and such. Of course, it's related. But the biggest issue, the driving issue, this inflation was all happening well before that. This just got sped up through the conflict and the war. It's from government borrowing and spending, of course. So we got a real issue there. Now, an interesting stat with that polling that came out too, speaking of energy, with 70-some% of Americans saying, okay, we're ready for the Keystone XL pipeline. That means a heck of a lot of Biden voters are finally got the common sense driven into their head a little bit. And I think maybe a lot of Democrat voters had that common sense to begin with in the first place anyways. But, that party's always been strongly influenced by a minority of very strong environmental forces, celebrity-driven things such as that. And that's pressed their policy and that's pushed their policy. But in politics, we know it always comes down to public support. And if they feel they're going to lose too badly in the midterms, they're going to change their direction. So that's a promising thing to see. We also saw with Premier Kenney an interesting stance he took when he's talking, I'm not so sure about that, but about guaranteeing the pipeline further if Biden would just approve it. Because, the last time he guaranteed that and called it low risk, we got burned for $1.5 billion potentially. So I'm not sure if doubling down is the best bet. But if we could convince Biden to turn around and get that thing moving, because the more we can get our product to market, the better it is. That's just simple economics, straightforward economic management, which we unfortunately seems too complex for a lot of political leaders and supporters. But the people on the ground are changing their minds. When it suddenly costs you that much to fill up your car, opening up a pipeline from Canada suddenly doesn't look all that bad. So let's bring in our first guest for today. We've got independent MLA for Medicine Hat, Cypress Hills, Drew Barnes, who recently wrote a column for the Western Standard talking about a northern by-election. So let's pop him in here. Hey, Drew, how's it going there?
Oh, Cory, it's great. Good morning to you. Thanks for talking to me.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was kind of interesting. You're an independent MLA. You're certainly outspoken. That's part of why you're an independent MLA, actually.
Yeah, true.
So we've got some, as always, very interesting political times. As we've covered on here, there's a by-election. Actually, tonight we're going to find out who won in Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche. That was a vacated seat. The government certainly didn't want to go to a by-election there, and they waited till the very last possible time to go to it. Paul Hinman, as the leader of the Wildrose Independence Party, decided to run in it, and you wrote on how you feel that's quite a gamble on his part.
Yeah, it is. I mean, first of all, polls and Paul Hinman have been claiming that the Wildrose is polling as high as 35 points. What a huge opportunity, what an opportune time it is to convert dissatisfaction with Premier Kenney into support for another option. And let's talk about that for a second, Cory. Premier Kenney polling as, hardcore support at only 6%. And of course, 60% of Albertans voted for him and fiscal conservative change just 3 years ago. So there's some side of 50% of Alberta voters who are looking for a home. And, this recent budget that we're in budget estimates right now, holding the government to account, the government under Jason Kenney is spending $6 billion more than our NDP government did. And he tries to identify himself as a fiscal conservative. We're $115 billion in debt. And the minute, thanks to an increase of $10 billion in oil and gas royalties, the minute that he has a small surplus, he blows that out of the water by, spending it here, spending it there without accountability. So it's really a person's opportunity to give those fiscal conservative, those economic freedom Albertans a new home. And, as I stated in my letter, the Wildrose and Paul Hinman have been polling between 20 and 35%. Let's see if Paul and the Wildrose can convert those, those poll numbers into actual votes today.
Yeah, well, and so what's the gamble aspect, I guess? I mean, if it's a big leap. I mean, if Paul won that seat up there, it'd be quite an upset, and it would almost be history repeating, like with the Wildrose when he did back in Glenmore. It would certainly be a party that can't be ignored any longer. But if he comes in with a terribly low showing, I guess then that would actually even potentially set them back.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost like a leadership review. Again, there's all kinds of Albertans that feel the UCP isn't home. There's all kinds of Albertans, maybe more, that will never vote NDP, and they're looking for a place to go. Paul's been up there for months knocking on doors and talking to Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche constituents, and let's see if he can convert the dissatisfaction with Kenney, the fear of an NDP government into actual votes. Big risk for Paul in some ways to go there. Of course, we all know that Brian Jean running for the UCP on a anti-Jason Kenney stance, that will make it interesting. Cory, the other thing that's interesting to me is at this point in time, it's clear that the NDP wants to run against Jason Kenney 14 months from now. They've been beating him in the polls by over a year. They're out fundraising him 2-1. It looks like they haven't had a total effort up there to actually try to win that constituency. Wanting the disruption that Brian Jean may cause in the caucus, and but again, they want to set the table to run against Jason Kenney. So let's see what happens today.
Yeah, well, welcome to Alberta and our hornet's nest of bizarre politics. I mean, we have such an unusual campaign with a UCP candidate who's actually the anti-premier candidate. You've got the NDP. Well, at least they're consistent. They're NDP. And there's no victory no matter what happens tonight in that by-election for Premier Kenney.
No, there's not. But north there should there be. You know, he so hasn't met Alberta's expectations. The fact that our government is spending $62.5 billion this year, 6 billion more than the spendthrift NDP ever did. The fact that we're 115 billion in debt. The fact that any small surplus he had this year is being, thrown into programs rather than reducing our taxes or reducing our utility costs. What should the win be for him? And, Cory, the other thing that needs to be said is my goodness, so much time is being spent now on April 9th in Kenny's leadership review, at a time we're passing a $62 billion budget. What we should be looking at is reducing taxes, reducing the utility costs for Albertans, and getting more value for the money being taken.
Well, and that was part of, I talked to Paul, he was actually on the show yesterday. And something I saw that, like yourself, he was talking about the bigger issues, the spending, the energy, standing up to Ottawa, of course, with the Independence Party. That's a strong stance to be taking. And I would hope that resonates more with voters because, Brian Jean's campaign to date has mostly been vote for me because I'll be a thorn in Premier Kenny's butt, which I guess some people might appreciate with the unpopularity of Kenny. But, issues are far more important than a personal grudge.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just it. A lot of people have said that to me. They said, what's Gene's vision? Why does he want to be leader? So what would be the difference be? And he hasn't explained that at all. And again, Paul is correct. It is time for Albertans to, take the risk to and push for a fairer deal from Ottawa. When I was on the Fair Deal panel, 80% of Albertans went to the mic, including Fort McMurray, including Calgary, and said that. So it's a no-brainer. But the fact that Premier Kenny hasn't tried to do something about the environmental overreach, environmental laws that have hindered our industry, the fact that he didn't ask for a Alberta appeal court reference on the COVID mandates, instead just followed the Ottawa, restrictions and did his own blindly, shows that he's not willing to do it. And again, when so many Albertans tell me that it's time, they've seen too much hardship and mostly we've seen too much opportunity not be capitalized on. So we're just going to have to see what happens today. It'll be an interesting night for sure.
Yeah, well, and I've been excited, or I was excited by the Fair Deal panel. I liked the stuff it concluded. I went to a couple of those meetings when they were down in my neck of the woods, and I heard what I would anticipate from Albertans talking, and I heard what I thought I would want to hear from the MLAs who were sitting on the panel. As if only one of the recommendations of that panel was on the go, I would be a little more satisfied with the government. But all this time, all this talk, 3 years in, nothing, more talk about more talk. Well, we're going to talk about a police force further. We're going to talk about a pension plan further. We're going to talk. No action.
No action, Cory. We've been talking for 20 years about these things. At that time, I think it's $350 billion has left Alberta for the rest of Canada. At that time, we haven't got resource movement. We haven't even got free trade. And when I came out with my dissenting opinion saying we needed to take steps immediately to gain the leverage from our own police force, all the benefits from our own pension plan. It'd be $3 billion more a year to help seniors afford their lifestyle or to have lower premiums for employees and employers. When I come out and said, and the only way, or the best way rather, to hold Ottawa accountable is an independence referendum 3 years from now, let Albertans decide if Ottawa does enough in the interim to make sure that we do get a fair deal. And of course, you recall what Premier Kenny did. You either love your nation or you don't. I think he put $8 million into a police study that who knows where that's at now, and basically made the whole thing quiet. So again, that's one of the other reasons why that this is an important by-election for Paul Hinman and the Wildrose. We've been talking about these things for 18 months since the Fair Deal panel. There's 50-60% of conservatives with no economic freedom, fiscal conservative home right now. And so let's see if Paul and the Wildrose can fill that void today. And let's see if we can use that to make Alberta free and prosperous.
Great. So on an unrelated note, since I've got you, one of your constituents recently returned from Ottawa to quite a a large welcome. Were you there in person? Or I saw you tweeted a picture of it when Tamara Leach showed up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't. We were unsure if Tamara was going to make it back Friday night or Saturday, and I had a speaking engagement in Red Deer Saturday, so I did miss her. Tamara and I did have a good coffee a couple days ago, and you know, we owe her and the truckers so much. First of all, look at the effectiveness of this. As it started to roll, you know, Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, immediately saw what this could lead to in Saskatchewan in terms of trucker convoys and dissatisfaction. So he was the first to eliminate most of the mandates. You know, Premier Kenney followed a short time later, and other premiers. And then when Trudeau put in the Emergency Act, 2 days later, hundreds, maybe thousands of Albertans and Canadians moved their money out of the banks for fear of what would happen there. And Trudeau ended up being forced to to rescind the Emergency Act right away. So, you know, Cory, and let's not forget how organic this movement was. You know, Tamara is a hard-working mother and grandmother, I believe, and energy worker, farm worker who with being support from all kinds of everyday Albertans, organized this thing organically and got there. My colleague Todd Lowen went down, and he told me there wasn't a mile between here and Ottawa that there wasn't a family or a person on the side of the road waiting hours, drinking a coffee, waving a flag. I mean, so look at that support. So here we are with a lady that spent 18 days in jail, part of that in a cell by herself, you know, and bail conditions now that, you know, that are going to limit her freedom. And at the end of the day, I think charged with mischief and collaborating to cause mischief, you know, where, you know, a lot of the comparables have been out there. The person that drove a car into a demonstration in Winnipeg did only 2 or 3 days in jail before bail was set. Yeah, there's Tamara there. Yeah, you know, we owe a lot to her. We owe a lot to the truckers for standing up for freedom. And let's not forget that peaceful assembly, peaceful demonstration is essential to making our democracy in our province strong. Cory, I've been saying to Albertans, you know, please from now on, give us 15 minutes a month, 5 minutes for your country, 5 minutes for your province, and 5 minutes for your municipality. Well, you know, Tamara's a lady that gave us 18 days in jail and 30 or 40 days away from work and her family. And yeah, it was effective.
Yeah, well, I think part of why she was held for so long was, I mean, they were trying to maintain a very big narrative, and we're seeing some of that falling apart in a number of levels, that this was an insurrection and that these people were crazed and they were dangerous. And when people see, no, this is a mother and a grandmother and just a common, you know, concerned Canadian citizen, they didn't want that out there because it undercuts their narrative. So, you know,
Yeah.
I think it was in their interest to just kind of keep her behind closed doors. So it's unfortunate. I'll just kind of finish up with you, though. We're coming into a full provincial election year. We're a year away from one.
Mhm.
I know it's still hard to plan anything on these crazed times, but what are you looking ahead to for yourself? You're still an independent and working hard for your constituents, but you got some decisions to make in the next 365
Yeah.
days, I guess.
I sure do, Cory. Thanks for that question. I've been talking to my wife and my family quite a bit, and I'm grateful to represent Cypress Medicine Hat and Albertans for 10 years. I believe I have the energy and the skill and the ideas to continue. From here, we have to sort out, you know, whether I join a new conservative party or an existing conservative party or run as an independent. A lot of people are focused on April 9th. And of course, April 9th is the day that Jason Kenney's leadership review happens. So I think it's important to be involved. It's absolutely important to vote against Jason Kenney's leadership continuing. He has not met expectations. He has not delivered the fiscal conservative mandate that he was given. So at this point in time, over the next 2 months, I'm going to be talking to people like Wildrose. I'm going to be seeing what happens in the leadership review. We're going to spend a lot of time talking to my constituents, especially. I've got a 3-day trade show in Medicine Hat towards the end of April. We're making some phone calls right now and see the direction that they want to go. But I'm very much wanting to continue to make sure that Alberta can be the freest and most prosperous place. And Cory, you know, back to you and our Wildrose days, you know, we had so much right about wanting grassroots involvement, local decision making, and what this COVID pandemic and Ukraine situation has shown, the more we can return to local decision making, the better. And that's what I'm going to focus on, and that's where I'm going to start. So thank you.
Well, great. Well, thanks for keeping it up and the update. And of course, I always appreciate it when you come on. So we'll all be watching closely, and I'm certain we'll be talking again soon.
We will. Cory, have a good day.
Great. Thanks, Drew. So yes, that was Drew Barnes. He's the independent member for Cypress Hills Medicine Hat. And yeah, lots of irons in the fire there. We do have some crazy turbulent provincial political times going on. Some people have asked, I've had a few people saying, why don't you get Tamara on the show? She's under, as John Carpe wrote and Melanie mentioned, a whole pile of bail conditions. I mean, thankfully they let her out of the buckets, but she still is very much basically under house arrest and not to be communicating with anybody, or she could get thrown right back in. They didn't say don't talk to media, but they said no social media, and it would just be exceedingly risky for her to get out and speak. Just leave her alone and let her enjoy her family as things move through the system. We've talked, we had her lawyer on. That interview was very good. That's Keith Wilson. He spoke with us. If you look back on the YouTube history, you could see that it was very well received, and we are following up on it, but we can't get Tamara herself on. Others have asked if Brian Jean's been on. No, I haven't interviewed him. I've encountered him a number of times over the years, but we haven't managed to get him on the show yet. We'll see. We'll see if he wins tonight. Certainly want to talk to him. The interesting thing is, if he doesn't win, we'll see if he still hangs around politically. That's always some difficult decisions to be made. So what was I thinking of? Oh, yeah. So getting on to, speaking of political decisions, I'll talk about a few more news items. Getting on to an Alberta provincial police force. This kind of ties into what I was talking about with the Defund the Police lunatics and what they're pushing. But something we've talked about, and as I was saying ad nauseum, we've talked about in Alberta forming a provincial police force. See, some people take that as taking a shot at the RCMP, and I know some people are unhappy with the RCMP, and that's fine. But the RCMP would still be there. I mean, if a provincial police force is there, just like many other provinces have, it just means you would have a dominant force that would be provincially mandated, provincially, regulated by the government, rather than federally controlled, which brings control into our province much more closely and directly. The other thing I see, though, as we said, a lot of people do have issues with policing. They are concerned about it. There are some police cultural issues. I mean, I think it's exaggerated with some people think it's some institutionalized racism and such, but there is racism within these forces. There's problems with some people. Absolutely there is. And there are, it's part of when you're getting people, I guess, into the type of person who goes in to be a police officer. It's a different mindset. It's a different world to work in. You're working in conflict and face-to-face with people all the time in rough situations. And it's led to a lot of issues with female police officers. It's not unique to any force where they've had a really hard time. And so there's some cultural things that need to change. But it doesn't mean you scrap the whole thing. It doesn't mean you defund it. I can't think of anything stupider than saying, well, you're not working out right, so we're just going to cut your funding. But when you get the opportunity to create a whole new force, let's look at other forces. Let's look at what's been working, what's not been working. Let's look where the problems are then and fix them. Have a different training regimen, have a different associations between officers. We got a lot of things we could do with an Alberta provincial police force. Don't assume it would be a carbon copy of the existing forces. That would be dumb. We're growing forward. That's part of the problem I think the RCMP has. Yeah, as Steve Ruthven was pointing out, we had a story on that. The RCMP is having a hard time even recruiting new officers. They needed 1,500 is what he's got there, and 386 were hired. That ties into a lot of things too, because morale on police forces, that came out in Calgary, I think, with a big poll, and it's happening everywhere, is extremely low. And it's, as I was saying with that rant earlier, it's because they're getting crapped on every level. I wouldn't want to be a cop. Look at this stuff. Everything from getting screamed at by some entitled Karen on the side of the road because you're writing her a speeding ticket, or spit on by some idiot you got to drag out of a bar who is fighting and who's losing his crap. And you got to maintain your control and not club him over the head, no matter how dearly you might want to. Or having to stand between two large groups of protesters and keep them from attacking each other or for damaging property. And no matter what they do, they get in crap for it. So no wonder people don't want to go into it. And no wonder the ones who are into it are unfortunately sometimes acting out poorly. It's all part of a much bigger thing. And I mean, forming a new force with the Alberta Provincial Police doesn't mean perfection by any means, but it sure is an opportunity where we can start looking into, well, where are these problems? What's leading to these problems, these outbursts, these dangerous actions by some police officers? and we can rectify those things. So, yeah, there's a lot of discussion to be had. But again, the provincial government doesn't seem to be interested in moving down that road. They just want to talk about it. They keep dangling that carrot in the end of the stick. If you know, we're really building up to every interview, of course, whether it's Paul, whether it was Drew and others. We've got a big turning point on April 9th. It sounds like thousands of people are going to be going out there for that leadership review. It really is hard to guess what's going to happen there. But I think Kenny would have been a heck of a lot stronger if he had just done even one of the things recommended by the Fair Deal panel. And he didn't, you know, so that's how much more do you want to believe? How much longer do you want to be led on? It's 3 years now they've been in. Like, you know, the time for talk is done. And they haven't done so. And I think that's really reducing Premier Kenny's chances of winning a strong support, if even that 50% one that's going to come on April 9th. It's a really crazy, tumultuous time in politics. Getting back a little bit, now this is an area they don't talk much about, but when I was talking about also, hey, if we want to go into that free world where we have castle doctrine and stand your ground laws, things basically for self-defense, we should be in a world where you're allowed to use a firearm to defend yourself in a dire situation, of course, not frivolously. You know, somebody's siphoning your fuel, you shouldn't have the right to, you know, fill them full of lead. But if they're breaking into your home, you should have the right to defend yourself. And a lot of people own firearms with those things in mind, and thankfully they rarely ever have to use them for that. We've seen that in Alberta, though, in cases like Eddie Maurice and some others who got dragged before the Canadian courts because they dared to defend themselves. Eddie stood between a couple of meth heads who were trying to break into his property and his 2-year-old daughter that was in the house, and a ricochet injured one of the meth heads, and Eddie got charged and was put through the absolute ringer for months until the courts finally let him go, because they knew if it went to a jury, they were going to acquit him, and it was stupid. But we need those laws entrenched so you don't have to go through the courts and all that sort of thing. Plus, we need to respect that most people who own firearms do it legally, responsibly, and safely. So we got an association for people to do that, and that's the Canada Shooting Sports Association. These guys, their name says what they are. They're an association of people who enjoy shooting sports, whether it's target shooting, hunting, collecting, any of those things. These guys are there for you. They got the resources like any other association. They have videos on safe use and operation of firearms. They've got resources to point towards hunting sites, trade shows, all sorts of things like that. And of course, most importantly and of all, they speak out on behalf of firearm owners, because you need a lobby group to speak out for you. The government is always trying to take away your property, take away your rights, reduce those. And the Canada Shooting Sports Association, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, they've got 3 legal challenges against the Liberal government right now to stand up for your rights, to defend yourself or defend your property, I should say. And I mean the property of your firearms, because the Liberals failed with their registry, they failed with their plans in the past, but they haven't stopped. What they keep doing is orders in council and just recategorizing a whole bunch of firearms and taking them away from you. So get out there, support these guys. You can't stand up for yourself without getting out to help those help you. And take out a membership with the Canada Shooting Sports Association. Their website is cssa-cila.org, and they're well worth it. Yeah, I see some of the other conversation with people talking about having a Doberman for protection and baseball bats. And as Jerry Armstrong Price said, with the Doberman or the baseball bats, yeah, if you use it wrong, you will be charged. With Pamela saying she's a Doberman, and you know what? If you sick the dog on them, chances are you'll be charged. You'll probably get acquitted later, but they will run the process as the punishment. And that's a real problem we have. I live in Prentice, just south of the city. I did know Eddie Maurice. I was very active on things actually back when he was going through the courts. And I remember there were huge, very busy town hall meetings being held in rural Alberta, in our area, in Okotoks and all through there with the police, because we were concerned about rural crime and any ability, because we have a lot of crime down there. The criminals see rural properties as being vulnerable. There's a lot of stuff outside. There's exceedingly long in my area. Even though I'm 10 minutes from the city of Calgary, the police response time on average is 40 minutes where I live. 40 minutes. Because the Calgary police don't respond. It's RCMP, and my nearest RCMP detachment is Turner Valley. And at nighttime, they've only got one guy on. It could be an hour's drive away, or it could be 5 minutes away. And that's where that average comes into 40. If somebody's violent, you're in a dear amount of trouble. And I remember a person asking an RCMP officer, well, what if I shot the vehicle with a paint gun, to mark it so it makes it easier for to catch him, paintball gun. He said, you'll be charged with pointing a firearm. I said, but it's not a firearm. Well, no, but I guess the way the law works is if it even looks like a firearm, you could be charged. If you're utilizing it like one, I can understand a little of that. If you were trying to threaten somebody with a replica firearm, it's a crime. But if you're talking about marking a thief's vehicle with a paintball gun, but you can't do that. I said, what if you go like this? Is this going to be a violent crime? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me out of some of them. Everything that people said, the police would say why you can't do it. They do not like, the RCMP in particular, do not like when you take care of yourself. And they would always, the way I said is their policy was call, cower, and pray. You got somebody coming onto your property, you're rural, call, and then cower somewhere in a corner and pray that the RCMP get there in time to save you from whatever is coming, which most of us in rural areas won't do. That's the only reason it's not as huge a crime wave in rural areas as people think would be with such vulnerable property, because at least some thieves are smart enough to know that going onto rural properties could be one of the more hazardous areas to try and steal from. It can be difficult. But I mean, we shouldn't have to play games with it. We should just have that right to defend ourselves, defend our property, defend our households. And unfortunately, we don't quite have that. It's a problem. It's a problem. And that gets back again to maybe where a provincial police force can have a better focus and deal, they can't change the law, but they can change their priorities. And we wouldn't be so fixated on cracking down on citizens for defending themselves and worrying about the fate of these robbers who come onto their property. And so what have we got here in the comments? More of the same going on. Let's say inflation. Here's an interesting one because we're getting mixed messages out of the federal government. I was talking a little bit of inflation earlier. And it jumped nearly 0.5 percentage point as a result of the carbon tax, according to the Bank of Canada governor. The government was just recently saying out of cabinet that the carbon tax is going to save us money somehow, which is such a load of crap. But and 0.5 point doesn't sound like much. Well, it all adds up, guys. It certainly adds up. And that's just one contributor. And I'm sure the Bank of Canada governor would rather lowball too. So it's probably even higher than that. And let's not forget, April 1st, not just the April Fool's Day. They are going to raise your carbon tax. Your gas is going to go up another 13 cents a liter or so for nothing but a government money grab. That's all it is. It doesn't affect emissions. It doesn't help the environment. It's just packaged up that way to make it look pretty. And they're going to take your hard-earned money. And that's coming up in April. So this was obtained, by the way, from a common standing committee on finance that Global News, I guess, had to dig out the papers for. The government's never forthcoming with these things. And but he was asked by the committee, by Conservative MP Philip Lawrence, about the carbon tax's impact on the inflation rate. And, at first he said he didn't have a number, but he would get a written reply in short order. Let's see. A little further, I talked earlier about the protests still going on in Calgary. I know there's still some restrictions. There's still things to push back against. They are going down, though. The restrictions are going down. The path is going the other way. There's still room to improve. There's room to move. But people are of differing views on whether they're content now to let things move their course or whether they're not. So a lot are starting to ask with the protesters, well, why are you still protesting? Well, and again, they've got what they feel are reasons. The last time I went, though, there were fewer there than on past weeks. So it is starting to wind down, but a lot of people are still concerned. But an interesting release was there was a statement from the Canadian truckers found on YouTube claiming the protesters are going to return to Ottawa to protest again. I don't know. This was reported. I think I caught that one from Blacklocks. I'm not sure. But it sounds a little bit like on the rumor mill sort of thing. I mean, being a decentralized leadership sort of organizations, you can't really point to one organizational hub and say, this is what's going to happen and this is where it's coming from. But there does seem to be evidence that some folks are looking to try again. I'd also heard there might be people moving towards Coots again. I don't know. But I'm not sure if it's going to go as easily as it did last time. We've got police forces and cities and governments that are much more hypersensitive to the potential of another large-scale occupation, I guess you could say, coming on. I don't think they're going to let anybody come in and entrench very easily as they did last time. They will shut it down very fast on the way in. But these things are not over yet. I wonder, some people, though, there is an element that's gotten to the point of they're just discontent with everything. I understand. That's why my show is called Triggered. I always rant and rave and go on. I'm a chronic malcontent. That's what I'm about. But it takes a certain amount before I feel ready to actually go out in the streets and do things. And as these protests go down, I've got to remember, like the Yellow Vest movement that sort of flared up and went away. but there's always a hardcore group of people who just want to go out and protest everything all the time. And that's kind of what happened with that. And when it faded away with the Yellow Vest into a smaller core group of those malcontents, that's part of what killed actually one of the rallies. There was a truck rally that was supposed to be in support of like Trans Mountain Pipeline and things like that. Rally for resources. It fell apart because the more fringe, I know you guys cringe at the term, but there is a fringe element, started dominating the show, and it just got scrapped because it was going to turn into something that was going to have a negative outcome. And I fear with some of these protests, if they keep dragging on as these restrictions really are fading and most people are becoming content, the ones remaining potentially could start to be a little less rational than the earlier ones. So we'll see how this develops and evolves. I mean, everything's unique. It's not like we can look at a similar period in history with similar issues and know what's going to happen. But we're watching everything just carefully and with some trepidation sometimes. So I get on to my next guest here. We have a new addition. We've been adding people to the Western Standard so fast I can't keep up. And it's great though, because Ottawa has been the hub of everything lately, and we've got 2 new people in Ottawa now. And we'll be able to much better cover events as they break out that way. We've always been covering stuff, but of course, having people there in person makes it much, much better. And so we've got Rachel Emmanuel, and she is, as a number of the people with the Western Standard, came from legacy media initially, but has, in my view, evolved upwards into independent media and has joined the Western Standard team. So let's bring Rachel in and have a talk here. Hey, how you doing out there?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Very good. I appreciate you coming on today. Really liked your first article. You know, it was reasoned. You're not all full of vitriol and bitterness with your former employers. You just felt it. I guess it was time to move away from that more institutionalized form of media.
Yeah, absolutely. No bitterness there, no hard feelings. I am grateful for the time that I had there, and I definitely feel that I learned a lot, and everything I learned I'm going to take in with this new job. So excited about just being somewhere that I feel I can, follow my conscience a little bit more, write stories that I think are important, and just have an editorial tone that will agree and be more aligned with mine.
Well, no, and that's great. And I've been hearing that more and more, and we're seeing more and more of it. I don't know if you're familiar with Danielle Smith, but she was a leader of the opposition in Alberta at one point, and then she moved out from there and took on a job as a radio host. It did very well for a few years, but eventually she had so many clashes with management telling her which guests she could even have and which she couldn't. And finally, she just had to throw up her hands and quit. I spoke with Kid Carson out in BC. He was a radio host there. Same sort of thing. It wasn't a huge fight with the network, but just that they didn't feel that they could be free as journalists to talk about important items any longer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a constraint that a lot of us, I think, are feeling. It's too bad that it's kind of come to the situation. I am grateful that there is new outlets popping up where you have a bit more of opportunities to, follow what you believe that you should be covering and do it in a way that also reflects your editorial tone accurately. I know both Matthew Horwood, who also started with the Western Standard yesterday, same as me, we both left for similar reasons. So I'm excited to be working with this new team and excited to have a new opportunity, I think.
Great. And so it was just to get back to your story in which you wrote on the kind of the final straw episode was you'd written on an incident with the I think it was a Truckers Convoy story. Oh no, it was the protest with Chrystia Freeland, and her office took issue with the way it was framed in the story you'd written. But it sounds like the media outlet kind of capitulated and sort of changed your story then to match her demands or her office's.
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly having, my stories edited in ways that I didn't agree with, it was nothing new for me. I'm not sure if this is something that all, journalists experience across the board, probably to some extent. I do think it is an issue that we face more at iPolitics, being a bit short-staffed. Sometimes changes were made to your work and it was sort of just published without you having a chance to review it, or someone went back in afterwards and changed it. So this was something that I had experienced before and that had caused some problems in the past. But the Chrystia Freeland story was just much more controversial and garnered a lot of attention. And after it had been published online, it was trending. It was trending really well. It was getting lots of people were looking at it, taking interest in it. And then I got a call from an editor saying that Chrystia Freeland's office had called her and they were upset about the story. They were upset about the editorial tone and framing of the article. And I absolutely stood behind my reporting on that. So of course, a politician's going to be upset about a story that doesn't paint them in a flattering light. It's nothing new. And then a couple hours later, I got another call from this editor saying that they had made some changes to the story. So I was not even given an opportunity to review those changes in advance. I went back in and saw them online around the same time. The public did, and they even ran a correction for the story for some of the changes that they had made. And again, I had not seen the changes in advance, and I did not agree with the changes that were made to my work. At this point, I had already decided to take the job with the Western Standard, but then I just realized I couldn't write anything else for the publication. I was just not comfortable having my name on the website because I had completely lost control over work that was being published under it. And at that point, I made the decision that that was my last day and that I would not write anything else for them.
Yeah, and that is too bad. I'm the opinion editor here at the Western Standard, and I know people, at times they take issue with even the authors with the title I've chosen for their story as it goes up, but these are minor things. And occasionally I've had to go in and differ or go back and forth on views on the body within the story. And it being opinion, of course, it's a little more dicey than reporting. But I mean, I would never put something up until I've run it past the author and say, well, this is the edits we feel are appropriate. We go back and forth until it's approved. It doesn't go up. I just can't hack a story and put somebody else's name on it and stick it up there. It's not principled.
Yeah, absolutely. That was very concerning to me, not only that, we made changes after pressure from Freeland's office, but that I had no say in them. And then that we would even have deleted the original post and ran a correction and that I had absolutely no say in the matter. It was quite shocking and really quite upsetting. It's not a comfortable feeling having work published underneath your name that you don't stand by and that you're not proud of.
Well, that's it. And your name's attached to it. And you are a young journalist. I mean, you don't join journalism for, looking for large paychecks or an easy job or things like that in life. Usually it's because people they're drawn to it and it's a vision, but you want to explore stories. You want to dig into them and get your story out there with your name. And there's not many things more insulting than having somebody change your story on your behalf without consulting you.
Yeah, 100%. That's just it. It's not a fun feeling. But I've already, had quite a different experience here at the Western Standard. In my column, I sent it in. I wasn't sure how that was going to be received, and it received quite well. They actually sent it back with just a couple minor edits that I felt actually really improved it. So that was great and a bit of a new experience for me. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Oh, good. And and I just the concerns in general. I hope you settle in and it goes quite well here because we're a new outlet, but we're really developing and it's been going really good. And I mean, there's editorial slants, there's views, there's things that are covered, but there's always a reason you've got to keep a degree of control on things, but we're not afraid of upsetting the establishment. And that's, I think, what we're seeing a lot more in the legacy media. They're entrenched. They don't want to ruffle any feathers anywhere. And I mean, nothing good has come over years from journalism until journalists got up there and wanted to ruffle feathers. They got to push back a bit, and outlets are getting afraid to do it now.
Absolutely. And I think that this is especially important now when we're seeing just in the last 2 years such insane levels of government overreach into, as I mentioned in my column, really just into every aspect of public and private life. There is a deep need to be pushing back on some of these rules and really questioning the legitimacy of them, especially when we see, all these measures are in place to curb the spread of COVID-19 and the new variant. But when we look at public health outcomes across the board, they're actually doing significantly poor when we look at opioid-related deaths and depression and suicide and surgeries that are being missed and cancers that are not being found. So some of these things just really aren't adding up, and I don't understand why the scrutiny hasn't been more critical of that.
Well, that's it. We just need critical discourse. There are different sides, even though there's been an attempt to make a narrative as if there's one legitimate side and everybody else is crazy conspiracy theorists. Well, hold on. There's some very skilled people out there. There's some medical experts. There's other even statisticians that are putting out things that perhaps are contrary to the public line. And maybe they're wrong, maybe they're right, but we won't find out until we dig into them and look at them. And there's almost just a no-go atmosphere in a lot of outlets saying, no, we just won't even entertain the thoughts that the public health officials might be misguided in some areas.
Yeah, there's definitely a fear there, I think, to rely on any experts that aren't like government experts. Or there's a fear that you'll become seen as being anti-science or anti-vax, which is unfortunate. And I think especially when we have doctors that are on the government payroll, there's even that much more of a need to be, scrutinizing what they're saying. But we've seen just sort of a deep desire to draw away from any of the doctors that are, pushing against some of the narrative that we're seeing and offering different critiques and different insights, which is really unfortunate. Yeah,
well, either way, so you're going to be reporting from Ottawa. I haven't had a chance to look into it. So you're going to be dealing with Parliament Hill quite a bit, or just in the general Ontario area? What areas are you going to be focusing on mostly in the weeks, months to come?
Sure. So I'm definitely going to be looking at Parliament Hill, so anything coming out of the federal government, and then also Ontario. We have an election coming up in Ontario this spring, so I plan to be covering that. And then throughout the summer, we're going to be having the Conservative leadership race, so I'll also be following that. So we've got lots of big stories coming up. I'm very excited to be covering them for the Western Standard.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you coming on to talk about it today, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you adding to our team and our coverage out there in Ottawa. As I said, we've been doing well, but we'll be doing a lot better with you and Matthew on the job out there now. So thanks again, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. So yeah, it's Rachel Emmanuel, and yeah, you know, it's been almost frustrating to watch. I mean, I started in other areas and moved my way up into what's now, you know, new independent media. I didn't go to school. I wasn't drawn to any form of journalism or anything like that at a young age. But a lot of people get drawn to those things, you know, out of a sense of idealism. They want to get out there. They want to be, you know, they idolize, say, the old investigative journalists. You know, think would Watergate ever have been exposed and really sorted out unless a couple of journalists dug deeply into that? They got a lot of backlash and pressure, those guys, when they did that. And they hit the jackpot. Some other times, you know, investigative journalists might actually be down the wrong track. They could be wrong. But the more the better. And you've got to be able to ruffle the feathers of the establishment. And the establishment isn't liking that these days. It's not allowing it. So we're disenchanting, you know, a lot of young, talented people out there. And well, I guess the evolution is good in a way, though. This we benefit by that. The Western Standard, we've been getting some excellent talent and people on board, including Rachel and others. And a lot of them bring that legacy media experience. Just because they came from the legacy media, of course, doesn't mean they're tainted by any means. I mean, the reason we put out such fantastic news content is because we have Dave Naylor in the newsroom as our news editor, who has decades of experience in the mainstream prior. But it's just not an institution he wants to take part in anymore. And a lot of our columnists are in similar spots. So it's we keep developing, we keep expanding. I know we like blowing, you know, tooting our own horn here while we're at it, but it's, you know, important to point out why we're doing as well as we are. I think, you know, I'm talking to a bit of an echo chamber audience. The reason you're watching, I presumably, is because most of you like it, but people want some solid, unfettered journalism out there. And Rachel wasn't willing to sit in a place where she felt she couldn't properly do that. So she moved on. That's a pretty strong indication of principle right off the bat. As with Matthew and the other people in the newsroom. I mean, you get conflicts in media institutions. It happens, but we are seeing a trend. You know, as I said, I talked about Kid Carson out in BC or Danielle Smith here. And that's part of why we've got this show going. I mean, talk radio, for those who are listeners, has gone to crap. I mean, let's face it. There used to be some fantastic hosts out there with some really in-depth, entertaining content. You know, Dave Rutherford used to just rip into guests sometimes, and he would go into issues that would drive them mad. It was actually his coverage, I think it was the High River floods, where he got upset and he fought with the editors after being a stalwart part of that station. And when he parted ways with QRS 77 in the end, it wasn't good. Now our radio hosts are boring. They're dull as dishwater. They don't want to ruffle any feathers. They're there to make their paychecks. And it's, you know, hey, people got to pay the bills. They got to do their jobs. But I just can't listen to these guys anymore. It's sad. It really is, because it used to be so informative and entertaining at the same time to listen to some unrestrained hosts and journalists get out there. And we're seeing that as well. I mean, why would a cabinet minister's office even feel they have the right to call a publication and complain about what was put up there? I mean, if it was slander, okay, that's different. You know, if it was something that's completely untrue or extremely unfair, yeah, you could, you know, they got the right to defend themselves as politicians and things like that. But this wasn't a case of that. They just didn't like where she went, not what she said. And even worse, the publication caved in that case. And we see more and more of that. So again, you know, people are afraid to dig in on things. I mean, we get, you know, the Kenney government certainly gets upset with some of the stories we write because we dig into other areas, but we're just as happy to rip into the NDP or any other party if we feel they're going the wrong way. And when it comes to news reporters, they just write the news. They write what they see. There's no-go areas. Write and, of course, source it to be accurate. There's certainly policies and accountability, but there's no editorial thing saying you can't touch this, you can't go there. Yeah, it's just I see Nico's got my Twitter handle up just to remind people on conversations. Somebody I will be talking to. I gotten a great email from a fella yesterday on it. I'm going to be talking to Pierre Poilievre. It's going to be a recorded interview. It'll be tonight, and we're going to run that tomorrow. And I've only got 15 minutes with them, and I'll get as many questions in as I can. But I appreciate others sending questions. As I said yesterday too, I'm not going to go into the WEF thing. He answered that with Andrew Lawton quite thoroughly. I think there's no sense asking it again. So it's not me avoiding the WEF question. It's just the fact that he's already been asked and he's already made his response. So there's no sense getting repetitive. I certainly, at best with True North and Andrew Lawton, they would call them friendly competitors. We have no beef with them. So I'm not afraid of directing people over to what was a really good interview with Poilievre, with Lawton. And hopefully I can ask some questions that Andrew didn't get to, and we'll have a really good show for that tomorrow. But if you got other questions, I can't guarantee that I'll get them to him, but send them to cmorgan@westernstandardonline.com. And I'll certainly try, and I appreciate them. Plus, guest suggestions, topic suggestions, things like that. We got this show 5 days a week. It's a lot of work for me to make sure there's always a lot of issues and everything. But the more we can get feedback from you guys who are listening in, the better. So I appreciate that. And again, I'll do my little nag for the money. Make sure to subscribe to the Western Standard. Take it out. Best money you'll spend, $10 a month, $10 off if you use that code TRIGGERED when you do it. And that helps us keep going. That's why we're getting these new reporters. I'm really excited. So much we've covered Ottawa really well already for the small outlet that we are. And we had contacts out there. We've had some columnists out there, but we haven't had a full out staff on the ground full time like this now. And we've got 2 people out there. So we're going to see a lot more in-depth coverage of things, what happens in our nation's capital. So and Stephen Ruffin saying, Canada's state-run media goes far beyond the CBC. When Freeland's office interferes with the media. Yeah, that wasn't CBC that Rachel was working for. And all right, we got it. Since Derek forces you to wear a suit and tie, maybe go full Don Cherry. You could look pretty sharp in a high collar 3-piece. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to bring a picture of a jacket and tie I had in the past. And I'm sure somewhere buried in the basement box somewhere, I've got that thing. Maybe I could bring that in as these battles go on. I'm just not a shirt and tie guy, but I lost the dress code battle, so I got to keep wearing these things. I'm certain there's room for improvement with my my wardrobe, but we'll see. I don't know if I'll go full Don Cherry. He's already done that for us all and entertained us quite well. Hope he's doing all right. He's really getting up there, that fella. Now, something that came up. Let's get into a little more newsy stuff here. The Saskatchewan government, that digital identification system, and it said it would be optional for residents with the aim of facilitating better government programs. This is one of the areas, I talked a bit about this before, that it's unfortunate that governments have made us mistrust them so much that something like this becomes quite a controversy and people aren't willing to get involved in it. And I don't blame people for not trusting the government. Look how quickly they snatch people's bank accounts. I know the Saskatchewan government didn't do it, but a government is a government. And when they get a hold of power, they aren't too thrilled with it. But we've got a lot of inefficiencies with ID. Why the government does have your information already. They, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, they can find us pretty fast. There's a lot of things we can't do without some form of government issued identification. Federally, I've got my PAL that I like using when I need federal ID. But of course, I've also got my driver's license, and I've got my healthcare card, and I've got my social insurance card, and I got my birth certificate, and I got all of these things. I don't think it would be necessary, in the name of efficiency, putting it together into one identification card that could be scanned and identify those sorts of things all together wouldn't be a bad thing. It would be a move towards general efficiency. But of course, we fear that the government's going to use it inappropriately, which is a very real fear to have. So we'll see how that develops. But I'd like to see it. I wouldn't mind seeing more of a government ID in Alberta. For people in Alberta, the viewers, we've got these stupid paper healthcare cards. They're the dumbest things on earth. They fall apart in your wallet. They're garbage. And Lori, is not a bad thing. Yeah, not a bad thing. We have to have identification. We have to. That's modern society. Our problem is with the government. Yes, the government is a bad thing. The identification isn't. How the government uses the identification is a bad thing. Now, the government, you're saying I do, do I trust the government? No, I don't. But some things are unavoidable. I'm just saying they've already got your ID. They've already got your driver's license. They've already got every other piece you got. So I'm just looking at, if you got a problem with the government, we're talking about the global digital ID. Well, globalists will want it worldwide. Yeah, they probably will. And they already can. Look, you got your passport registered, guys, if you got a passport. You got your driver's license. One piece of ID or another is already shareable by the government. They've already got your info. So right now I'm just looking at more efficiency so we can maybe lay off some of those useless civil servants sitting around there and duplicating services. But, well, Gail, okay, you don't agree with me on this, and that's fine. Lots of listeners don't agree. But what do? Get rid of ID? Get rid of driver's licenses? Get rid of PALs? Get rid of passports? Get rid of health cares? Get rid of social insurance? Get rid of birth certificates? The ID's there. They got it. They can share it. They can share it with the WF. Well, Pat saying no thanks. Well, what's going to be different? I'm just talking about taking a bunch of cards and sticking them on one. They've got it, guys. They're not getting anything new. As June is saying, soon it'll be how far did you travel in your car? Are you vaccinated? Well, fine, but they've got all that information already. So if you got a cell phone, yeah, we're well tracked. Or even going farther back, back to air miles. It's funny. How many people, and I didn't mind. I think the air miles program is good. But the whole root of the air miles thing, what it was gathering information. Everywhere you went with your air miles card, that's where they got their value. That's where they got their money, because it was constantly tracked, and they could sell that data of consumers, because every purchase you bought at every sale price, every time of year, they get to know that this person at this age, of this gender, in this area at this time of year is purchasing these sorts of things, and it helps companies model their things. And that data is very important to them. And we give it away freely. We signed up for that card right away. And your cell phone, it tracks and shares where you are at all times. When you put your things up in Facebook and you fill out those little forms, it's data mining, guys. You share it. You choose to share it, even if you don't realize you're doing it sometimes. Gorgeous George saying they aren't coordinated. Yeah, I guess, there's a degree of the government, it doesn't know what one hand's doing in the other. But if they want information on you, they can get it. It's there. You can hide out all you like. But so here's another good point. I like the way Susan put it. Susan DeWald, a commenter, saying having ID and being made to show it for food or work is the problem. Yes, I can agree with that. See, there's where the issues came. If you got to have that vax passport to show your way in and out of places and stuff such as that. But the form of the identification itself wasn't the issue. It was the government policy. And I wouldn't mind having a wallet that doesn't have 25 cards in it that are just a bunch of repetitive things and a whole bunch of other things. I mean, I was thrilled when they finally, just let me put my bloody organ donor sign on my driver's license properly without having to go over and over and over again. Either way, it's just one of many issues. Again, what's reflected with the commenters, though, is just that deep distrust people have with the government. Yeah, and for very good reasons. And that's what I'm saying, is it's unfortunate that there has been such deep distrust brought in so that people don't want to move on to things that might lead to actually just some more government efficiency. Of course, government efficiency also means that they can pick your pocket with more efficiency down the road sometimes. Speaking of picking your pocket, then I'm going to get on to that with Bitcoin. Well, I'm going to talk to them one more time today. They are one of our better sponsors, and all our sponsors are great. We really appreciate them. But just a reminder, actually, as well, while I'm at it, and plug myself, if you have a product or service you wouldn't mind advertising with the Western Standard or on this show, hey, send me an email. Maybe we can set something up. It's a very good way to directly, talk about what product or service you have and get it out there to a good, targeted, common sense audience and market. But Bitcoin Well is one of our sponsors. And digital currencies, I know some people have some doubts there and they have concerns, but what I like about Bitcoin Well, it's not some foreign nebulous company. It's not distant and out of reach. These are real people on the ground. Like, they offer one-on-one consultations with a real live person in certain cities. Calgary, Edmonton, the West is where they are mostly. I believe in Montreal as well. And they'll do Zoom one-on-ones to help walk you through things as well and stuff like that. It's a real company that they're publicly traded, and they never have control of your money, and they make it straightforward for you. We've set that up with the Western Standard. I talked about that yesterday. They got corporate deals set up, so they can set you up with your wallet, and it's voluntary. And Mike, and those of us at the Western Standard have that choice. Have a percentage of your paycheck goes into your Bitcoin account, and then it actually gets matched by the Western Standard themselves. There's all sorts of combinations of things you can do. So that way I've got a little bit being set aside in a different account outside of that. It's a little comforting thing. I'm not putting a whole whack in there, but it's a nice way to set some aside a little bit somewhere else, whether it's, some people have some gold coins they squirrel away in their house and some other things. Well, this is another way to do that too. And the digital currencies are certainly a huge and growing thing in general. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com. They can explain the process and see if it is for you or isn't for you. That's what it's all about, and they really help, for people who are beginning in the digital currency market. So they're a good sponsor, and have a look at them. So getting back to stupid government, why not, right? There's always more stupid things they do. So this is a city one, but every city gets to deal with this one. Edmonton had their Talus balls, which is a bunch of little shiny balls in a stack, and I think it cost them $750,000 or some stupid thing. Public art projects are just brutal. Well, Calgary had one, and this one's come back in the news. It's been a while. It's called Wishing Well, and it had like a big silver ball and some stuff too. And the problem was with this thing was the artist didn't know a heck of a lot about physics, I guess. And what it did was actually the sunlight on it is an outdoor display, concentrated so much sunlight, it was like a magnifying glass. It actually burned a hole in somebody's jacket. It became a dangerous item. And this shows how stupid the government is anyways, and inefficient, getting back to that. So they yanked it out of there quickly. They said, oh, we got to get this out of here before we, light somebody on fire. I mean, burning children is always bad for PR. So they put it away, but they finally found a safer home, and they've put it in Bridgeland just north of downtown. Good work, guys. It only took them like 3-4 years. This is how we get with government. Problem, solution. If it's private market, okay, we got this art project that if it's out in the direct sun, it burns people alive. Okay, that's a problem. That's a problem. Move it. Okay. Private industry, we'd have it moved in a week. Government, it took those imbeciles years. I mean, on top of it, I can't even imagine what that thing must have cost. But, God, these guys just move at like a glacier. It's just brutal, and it's costing us a fortune. But yeah, they called it a multi-sensory interactive piece. Oh, here it is. Okay, I've got more detail on that. Created by renowned artists from Living Lenses. Yeah, living, all right. It was a lens that almost made somebody not live anymore. Luckily, that person didn't have flammable clothing on. It just melted, I guess. Of San Francisco, of course, at the cost of $559,000 to the city of Calgary through their public art program. Good work. That's your money well spent, isn't it? Again, getting back to why we don't trust the bloody government. I mean, not even just on that personal security thing in general, but just looking at how idiotic these people are with our money. Yeah, I know we don't want to give them any more bloody control than they already have. And some of that, more that's coming out. Cabinet use of the Emergencies Act. There's going to be an investigation. They're talking it's going to take them a year. And looking back on what they did, and I know it's way too long, getting back to being slow, stupid government. And their conclusions will probably be kept hidden, and then we'll have to do FOIP requests, and they'll send up redacted stuff. But our grandchildren might finally find out exactly what happened this last year with some of the stuff the government did with the Emergencies Act in their short period that they had it. But it's the Assembly of First Nations isn't so thrilled about it either. And they told the Finance Committee that it sets a bad precedent far and wide. And we do know that many First Nations do like exercising the right to protest and civil disobedience quite often. And they are concerned it's going to be used as a tool against themselves. And they should be. When government finds any tool that they can use against people, don't assume you're immune. This is stuff that I've been fighting, on Twitter with. For people who follow me there, if you want to see it more lively, it's at Cory B. Morgan on Twitter. But pointing out, again, with these guys who are saying, we want the police to come in there and just smack those heads of those protesters at the park and the Beltline. They're getting annoying. They're getting loud. They're honking their horns. They're ticking me off. Yeah. If the police become empowered and the city of Calgary becomes empowered to do that to peaceful protests, don't think for a second they won't do it to your peaceful protest later. That's how it works. That's how the precedents get set. So just because you don't like the freedom protesters, you don't like their message, you want to wear a mask till the end of time, good for you. It'll come back on you guys. The government isn't always going to be governed by a loony lefty like Jody Gondek. It's not always going to be Justin Trudeau. Eventually, there's going to be some conservatives who get in. It seems to be too far and few between sometimes, but they do that. And setting these precedents and letting the government just constantly come in and wipe out inconvenient protests is not good. It's not healthy for democracy. It's not healthy for anybody. So either way, this joint committee of parliament now has opened an inquiry into the actions against the convoy. It's an 11-member panel. They have 1 year to determine why the cabinet invoked those powers. It's got, all members. It's got bloc members and conservatives. So maybe something useful will come out of it, but it's going to take these ding-dongs a year. I don't hold out a lot of faith that they're going to be able to come up with good justification. And here's a good news story. I was a little sad about it at first. I mean, I heard Jerry Diaz, so he's the founding president of the Unifor, which is a big union in the private sector. A lot of the media actually are Unifor members. And he was sick, I guess, recently, and he recovered. But then he suddenly resigned from them. And at first I thought, oh dear, he's probably very, very sick. And the union guys I'm not a fan of, but and it's particularly Diaz because he is a scumbag. But all the same, I don't wish death or ill health upon them. I just wish they wouldn't be controlling our unions and our media and things such as that. But it sounds like he's actually under investigation over dealings in Unifor finances. The union's national treasurer ordered an outside inquiry, Unifor said yesterday. So it has nothing to do with his health, just his fiscal health. We'll see how whatever comes out of that inquiry, how public that'll get. But, there's where your union dues go, guys. That's that chunk of money they suck out of your wallet. But I mean, unions, look to the history of the Teamsters and how above board unions tend to be in general. They don't really have a really good history. It's no surprise they're so close to government institutions. They all know the same sort of ethics and to follow in general. I mean, we'll see. The union has no further public comment prior to receipt of the investigative report. And maybe there's nothing. Maybe benefit of the doubt, even with Diaz, innocent until proven guilty. Like I said, he's guilty of being a weasel in general, but we don't know if there was anything been done wrong. But when he resigns that quickly, we've got some smoke. There's probably a fire there. And that union has $285 million in assets that belongs to the 315,000 members who have to. Remember, union donations aren't voluntary when you're in a closed shop. They have to give them that money. And it sounds like perhaps that money has not been properly used. Here's another interesting one. National Defense Minister Anita Anand is planning a trip to the Arctic as she gathers her allied counterparts in Arctic countries for a joint discussion on the security of the region in light of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. I've mentioned on the show before, when I was in the oil field, I did 4 seasons in the Arctic, I should say. We just did winters. It was cold as all hell. It was up north of Inuvik, out in the Delta area, and up Tuktoyaktuk area on exploration projects. I got a lot of reading done while I was up there in those seasons, and it was good money. Very difficult areas to access, of course. Isolated, expensive, dark, cold, a lot of hazards. Our own military, for the most part, can't get up there. They can't. The dew line's gone. I mean, they're decommissioning all those sites. They're still cleaning them up to this day. And that was an old military line of stuff that was set up back in the 50s in the Cold War to watch for Russian invasions and missiles coming from over the north. But you see, what's been going on under the Arctic ice, which Canada can't do at all because we don't have nuclear submarines. The only way to get under Arctic ice caps is with a nuclear sub because you can keep maintain an air supply long enough down there. Diesel submarines, you're going to have a problem. You can't go that deep under the ice. It would be suicide. Canada, while we claim a whole pile of the Arctic up there, we can't even get to it. If there's going to be any claims against our Arctic, they'll have one valid point and say, well, you guys can't even get to it. How can you say it's yours? You won't develop it. You won't run a pipeline even from Inuvik. Not doing anything with it. So how can you say it's your Arctic? And the high Arctic, and we're talking high Arctic. Nobody lives up there, guys. There's some stations and a few little communities, but even the indigenous people didn't live in the high Arctic. It's like living on top of a glacier year round. But under that ice cap, there is water, and there are Chinese, Russian, American submarines. They move around under there. They do their stuff. We don't hear about the details. But they've got more control of Canada's Arctic than Canada does. Russia certainly does. And that might be the next big battle that's coming. We've had smaller little things, like a dispute with Denmark over an island in the Arctic, on the eastern end, which, they just do their little game of putting different flags on top of the rock. I mean, there's not much there. But there's a lot of oil and gas under that Arctic as well. I know that firsthand from working up there in those projects. And it's just sitting there. And if we don't develop it, somebody else might say, well, we're going to. And what could we do about it? Now, whether Anand is really going to do anything productive, I'll tell you the one thing they'll have to do, get nuclear subs, get icebreakers, because you can't get up there. The global warming, despite what crazy Dave Suzuki has said, hasn't opened up the whole Arctic yet. The Northwest Passage for periods of time in the year, perhaps. But the high Arctic, no, that's permanent ice. And we can't get to it. The last submarines we bought, if people remember it, was a while back. And that was English ones, used ones that we bought. And I believe it killed one or two of the sailors just as they were trying to bring them from England back to Canada because the thing caught on fire on the way here. They're rickety antiques, and we can't get to our own territory. So we don't have a really good claim on our own territory if we can't even actually get to it. So maybe the Russian situation will wake up some of the people of government. I don't want to see a big militarized government and everything, but if we're going to claim to be an Arctic country, we should have the ability to get to our Arctic regions. I mentioned that before when we were working on a camp out on the Delta that was frozen in on a barge out there way up in the Arctic. Government scientists were kind of boarding with us because they didn't have the resources. The oil companies had the resources to get up there. It was still terribly expensive, but the government couldn't manage to do it. So maybe they should reevaluate some of those things if we really want to keep claiming and pretending we're a sovereign country. So, okay, I'm going to wrap up. Tomorrow, of course, I'm going to be playing the Pierre Poilievre interview, and that should be very interesting. I'm sure that'll be quite good. Also, I'm going to talk to a respirator specialist, Chris Schaefer. This was somebody that I guess Danielle Smith had wanted to talk to before, but wasn't able to. Speaking of media, being told what you can and what you can't. But he put out a video on tests, real tests, and he's a specialist. He's not, a basement hack from YouTube University. He specializes in facilitating people's breathing. And he found that masks aren't necessarily as harmless as people may think they are, and they certainly aren't as beneficial as a lot of people think they are. And while most of the mask mandates are gone, they're not totally gone. And maybe it's time we work more on that. It's going to be an interesting discussion with him on what he's come up with and what he's studied. So that's about it for today, guys. Make sure to like us, share us, Facebook, YouTube, all that good stuff. That's how we can keep spreading the word out there. Tune in tomorrow at 11:30. It's going to be a good show. We'll report on tonight's by-election, and we'll have those interviews and more back and forth with you guys. So thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you tomorrow.